The Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, Lord.
Jesus said to the disciples, "About that day and hour no one knows, neither the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. For as the days of Noah were, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day Noah entered the ark, and they knew nothing until the flood came and swept them all away, so too will be the coming of the Son of Man. Then two will be in the field. One will be taken and one will be left. Two women will be grinding meal together. One will be taken and one will be left. Keep awake, therefore, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. But understand this, if the owner of the house had known in what part of the night the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and would not have let his house be broken into. Therefore, you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an unexpected hour." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Yes. Today marks the first Sunday of a new year, a church new year, and the first Sunday in Advent. Today we begin a time of waiting. Waiting is something that we all experience. In fact, one could say that our whole life is spent waiting. We wait for all kinds of things. Information puts us on hold as we wait on the phone while our ears are pumped with thin, irritating music. Our order hasn't come yet, and we are hungry. The elevator must be stuck. One's spouse is late. When will the rain or snow ever stop? When will that paint finally dry? Will anyone ever understand? Will I ever change? Our kids ask, how long is it until we get there? Or, how many days until Christmas? Life is simply a series of hopes and waiting and only partial fulfillments. Our human condition seems to be one of constantly unsatisfied desire. As we enter this season of the church year, Advent invites us to understand with a new patience that very difficult state of being, waiting. Advent means coming, and so we wait for God's coming, just as Calvin said. We wait as we prepare for God's greatest gift. And as we begin this time of Advent waiting, I find it wonderful and so interesting and so refreshing. The first words we are given today on this day come from the prophet Isaiah. The world in which Isaiah lived was a chaotic, unjust, broken, hurting, warring world. Israel was a storm-tossed nation that was threatened by the powerful Assyrians to the north and east and menaced by the Egyptians to the south and the west. The king and his advisors were occupied with what they needed to do to protect themselves. Events were out of control, and fear was running rampant. And into that turmoil and storm-tossed world, a voice stood out, the voice of Isaiah. The people were waiting for God to reveal a word concerning their situation, and God did speak and does speak through the prophet. The prophet Isaiah speaks of seeing a reality that is deeper than the reality the people were living. He proclaims God's vision for the world, holding up a vision of God's future, the one to whom the future belongs. He proclaims, "Look, focus your eyes upon the mountain of the house of the Lord, there on the shore. For it shall rise up and be established as the highest of mountains, and people of all races will come and say, 'Let us make our way together to the mountain of the Lord, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. He shall judge between the nations and shall decide for many peoples, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more.'" Into that chaotic, warring world, Isaiah speaks a word of hope and a word of peace. Biblical scholar Walter Brueggemann has compared these words from Isaiah to the "I Have a Dream" speech from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Isaiah provided words of hope and peace as the people waited for the future God promised, a future that was very different from what was visible to them just then. We are living in a chaotic, unjust, broken, hurting, warring world. World leaders and their advisors are now occupied with what they need to do to protect themselves. Events sometimes seem out of control, and fear is running rampant in many places within our culture. And into this turmoil and storm-tossed world, a voice stands out, the voice of Isaiah. On this first Sunday of Advent, as we begin a new church year and that Advent time of waiting, Isaiah speaks and promises a time when God's ways will fully shape how all of us live. Every single person, all the nations, all peoples will be streaming toward the bright light of peace, and there is enough for all. It may not look like that right now, but Advent is about taking the long view of things and seeing where that arc of justice bends as we look to the future. And as we wait for that time of God's fulfillment, God invites us not just to imagine and dream, but to make God's dream a priority in our everyday lives, living into that dream. As people of faith, we live holding up a vision of God's future for this world. That is the work of the church. Many of you probably remember the name Ruby Bridges. If you do, you remember that Ruby Bridges, the little 6-year-old girl who was one of the first African-American children to integrate the New Orleans public schools back at the beginning of the Civil Rights Movement. If you remember her story, every morning the federal marshals would escort Ruby through the lines of angry parents hurling insults, racial slurs, and violent words. And then the same thing happened every afternoon when school was let out. This went on for weeks and then months, until finally, virtually every white family had withdrawn their children from the school. So Ruby went to school all by herself for the better part of the term. The situation caught the attention of Harvard child psychologist Robert Coles. Coles decided to go to New Orleans, where he interviewed and spent time with Ruby and her parents. He interviewed her teacher, asked how she thought Ruby could tolerate such continual adversity and abuse. Just listen to the verbatim from that teacher. She said, "I was standing in the classroom looking out the window. I saw Ruby coming down the street with the federal marshals on both sides of her. The crowd was there shouting as usual. A woman spat at Ruby, but missed. Ruby smiled at her. A man shook his fist at Ruby. Ruby smiled. And then she walked up the steps, and she stopped and turned around and smiled one more time. You know what she told one of those marshals? She told him she prays for those people, the ones in that mob. She prays for them every night before going to sleep." The interview prompted Coles to speak directly to Ruby about her prayers. "Yes," Ruby said, "I do pray for them." Coles asked, "Why? Why would you pray for people who are so mean to you and say such bad things about you?" Ruby answered, "Because Mama said I should." Coles pressed on with the questions, and Ruby said, "I go to church. I go to church every Sunday, and we're told to pray for people, even bad people. Mama says it's true. My minister says the same thing. We don't have to worry," he says. He came to our house and he say, "God is watching over us." He say, "If I forgive the people and smile at them and pray for them, God will keep an eye on everything and he'll protect us." Coles asked if she thought the minister was on the right track. "Oh, yes," said Ruby. And then, in a way of explanation, "I'm sure God knows what is happening. God's got a lot to worry about, but there's bad trouble here. God can't help but notice. He may not do anything right now, but there will come a day, like they say in church, there will come a day. You can count on it. That's what they say in church." Yes, Ruby, there will come a day. You can count on it. That's what the church says. Ruby Bridges lived that as a child. And if Isaiah and Dr. King and Ruby Bridges could dream of peace and lift up that vision for us, we too can dream the dream of peace and rearrange our individual lives and the life of our communities, large and small, to be peacemaking communities of generosity, justice, and joy. We can work to develop communities where people listen to each other, communities of self-examination, of acceptance, of change, even if that change is not easy or fast. Now, I know we can't do this on our own, but God does make it possible, and God's grace enables us to accomplish so much more than we can even imagine. As we continue to wait for God's coming in fullness to this broken world, the promise of Advent is that what is coming is an unimaginable invasion, an invasion of holiness, an invasion of God in this world. So stay awake, be alert, and be ready. God is on the way. Yes, Calvin, God is on the way. That is what Advent is all about.
Amen.